The most powerful man in the world was fighting a private war inside his own mind. Marcus Aurelius ruled the vast Roman Empire, a position of unimaginable pressure. Plague swept through cities, armies threatened the borders, and he faced deep personal loss. Yet history remembers him not for a breakdown, but for his profound composure. How did he hold himself together? The answer was hidden in plain sight within the pages of his personal journal. That journal, known as Meditations, was never meant for anyone else to read. It was not a book of philosophy for the public, but a raw and practical system for mental survival. By the end of this, you will know the exact journaling techniques he used to maintain his sanity, techniques you can adapt to build your own unshakable resilience. We will uncover how a simple secret weapon against turmoil. What does it truly take to govern your own mind when the world feels out of control? His world was a tapestry of overwhelming pressure. On the surface, Marcus Aurelius presented the ideal of a philosopher king, a figure of calm reason carved into statues across the empire. But the private man, the one who picked up a stylus at night, was navigating a relentless storm. The empire he commanded stretched from the misty highlands of Britain to the deserts of Syria, a vast and fragile network of cities, roads, and millions of lives, all depending on his judgment. And during his reign, that network began to fray at the edges. A devastating illness, often called the Antonine Plague, swept through the legions and the crowded capital, claiming countless lives and sowing fear in every community. Along the distant Danube frontier, powerful tribes tested the borders, requiring long and grueling military campaigns that kept the emperor away from Rome for years. Then came the personal losses, the private griefs that no crown could shield him from. He outlived many of his children, a profound sorrow that echoes quietly in his writings. This was the true burden, the immense weight of public crisis and private pain pressing down on a single human mind. His journal, therefore, was not a scholarly exercise. It was an emergency toolkit. He was not writing to teach others how to be stoic. He was writing to remind himself how to breathe, how to think, how to simply get through the next hour without being crushed by the enormity of it all. The gap between his serene public image and this internal struggle is what makes his method so powerfully relatable. You do not need to rule an empire to understand what it feels like when responsibilities pile up, when external events spiral, and when private sorrow clouds your vision. His problem at its core is a human one. How do you function? How do you lead? How do you even get out of bed when everything seems designed to break your spirit? His answer was waiting in the pages of that simple notebook, beginning with a deceptively quiet first step. This text we call Meditations is perhaps one of history's most misunderstood masterpieces. It carries the weight of a great philosophical work, but to approach it expecting a structured argument or a polished lesson is to miss its entire purpose. What you are actually reading is the private diary of a man talking himself off a ledge over and over again. These were not chapters composed for an audience, but fragmented notes, urgent reminders, and raw self-exhortations scratched onto parchment by candlelight, likely during the quiet, lonely hours of military campaigns. You will find no introduction, no narrative flow, and no attempt to persuade anyone but the author himself. The prose is often abrupt, circling back to the same core ideas with a repetitive, almost desperate intensity. He calls himself to order, scolds his own weaknesses, and pleads with his mind to see reason. This raw, unvarnished quality is not a flaw, it is the entire function of the document. Think of it not as a book he wrote, but as a psychological tool he used. It was his mental gymnasium, a place to exercise his principles under the heavy weight of real-world pressure. The repetition is the point, because we do not learn resilience by hearing a clever idea once. We build it by rehearsing that idea daily in the face of our specific anxieties. The value lies in the practice, not the prose. This is why his journal has resonated for centuries, not because it presents perfect answers, but because it honestly documents the struggle of applying them. It shows a great mind in the messy, imperfect act of trying to be better. And at the heart of this practice was a deliberate shift in perspective, a foundational move that transformed his entire experience of the world's chaos. The journal's power came from a specific kind of conversation happening on the page. Marcus Aurelius was not merely logging his day or venting his frustrations. He was engaging in a deliberate, structured dialogue with himself. He wrote as both the student and the teacher, the patient and the therapist. One part of his mind would voice a fear, a complaint, or a moment of weakness, and the other part would immediately answer it with reason, perspective, and principle. You can almost hear the back and forth. When anxiety about an upcoming battle or a political betrayal would arise, he did not just note "I am afraid." He would challenge that fear directly. He would write, "Ask yourself, is this thing you dread truly within your control? If it is not, why are you letting it steal your peace? If it is, what is the next right action you can take?" This was not passive reflection, it was active cognitive surgery. He was externalizing the chaotic noise in his head so he could examine it under the clear light of his own chosen values. In modern terms, this is the very essence of cognitive behavioral therapy, a practice that would not be formally named for another 1800 years. The core idea is that our emotions are not direct reactions to events, but to our thoughts about those events. By writing down those automatic, often distorted thoughts, and then logically disputing them on paper, we break their emotional spell. Marcus was doing exactly this. He was identifying the stories his mind was telling him about loss, about pressure, about failure, and he was writing a wiser, more grounded counter-narrative. This dialogic self-therapy transformed the journal from a repository of worry into a training ground for clarity. Each entry was a rehearsal for composure, a script he was writing for his future self to follow when the pressure mounted. And the most powerful tool in this internal dialogue was a simple, two-word question he asked himself constantly, a question that cut through confusion like a blade. That two-word question was, "What is this?" It formed the bedrock of his morning ritual, the first deliberate act of mental preparation each day. Before the sun rose, before the petitions and the military dispatches demanded his attention, Marcus Aurelius would sit with his journal. This was not a time for grand planning or creative inspiration. It was something far more practical, a psychological inoculation against the chaos to come. He called this practice the Morning Premeditation, and its goal was disarmingly simple: to foresee the troubles of the day and disarm them in advance. He did not hope for a perfect, smooth day. He assumed it would be filled with friction. So he would write, visualizing the specific irritations he was likely to face. He knew he would encounter people who were ungrateful or arrogant or simply difficult. He anticipated delays, bureaucratic obstinacy, and his own moments of weariness or temptation. The key was to meet these mental images not with dread but with prepared intention. In his own words, he advised himself to say to yourself first thing in the morning, "Today I shall meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil." He did not write this to cultivate cynicism, but to cultivate patience. By naming the challenge beforehand, he stripped it of its power to surprise and provoke him. When the arrogant senator actually arrived, Marcus was not caught off guard, he was prepared. His internal response was already scripted. "I will meet this person with kindness, for they are acting from ignorance, not malice." This is the core of the Morning Premeditation. It is a rehearsal for virtue. You visualize the difficult conversation, the frustrating delay, the tempting distraction, and you mentally practice the person you want to be in that moment. You decide in the calm of the morning how you will respond in the heat of the afternoon. It transforms you from a reactive creature, buffeted by every annoyance, into a proactive agent guided by your own principles. This practice turns the entire day into a kind of training ground where every obstacle is no longer a mere interruption, but an expected piece of equipment for building your character. And this forward-looking preparation was only half of his system, for he understood that wisdom also required looking back with clear and honest eyes. But the emperor's journaling system was not complete with just a morning forecast. It required a corresponding practice at the other end of the day, a quiet audit under the lamp's gentle glow. This was the evening examination, the second pillar of his sanity. After the last official had departed and the camp fell silent, Marcus would return to his notebook. Here he performed a retrospective review of everything that had transpired since dawn. This was not a diary entry in the modern sense, not a simple recounting of events or a raw dump of feelings. It was a structured, analytical inquiry. He would look back on his own actions, his reactions, and his private thoughts, holding them up against the clear mirror of his Stoic principles. The guiding questions were simple yet profound. Where did I go wrong? Where did I let an external event disturb my inner peace? Did I act with justice? Did I contribute to the common good, or did I retreat into selfish concern? The purpose was starkly educational, not emotional. This was a learning exercise, a way to identify the gaps between his aspirations and his actual behavior. He approached his own failings not with the lash of self-hatred, but with the calm curiosity of a scientist studying a flawed experiment. Why did that senator's insult provoke me? What undisciplined belief within me gave his words that power? The goal was to isolate the error in judgment so it could be corrected tomorrow. This stands in sharp contrast to much of modern journaling, where we are often encouraged to dwell in our emotions, to vent and describe our anger or sadness without a framework for moving through it. That can sometimes leave us circling the same emotional drain. Marcus's method was different. He acknowledged the feeling only as a clue, a signal pointing to a mistaken belief that needed examination and revision. He was not judging himself as a bad person. He was analyzing his choices as a student of life. This nightly review transformed experience into wisdom. A frustrating meeting became a lesson in patience. A moment of fear became a lesson in distinguishing what is within our control from what is not. By ending each day with this honest, gentle scrutiny, he ensured that no hardship was wasted. Every challenge, even his own stumbles, became raw material for building a stronger, more resilient character for the morning to come. This nightly review was a process of refining his vision, a crucial skill he called the discipline of perception. For Marcus Aurelius, perception was not a passive reception of facts, but an active art of interpretation, a space where his freedom truly resided. He understood a fundamental truth: we do not suffer because of events themselves, but because of the judgments we attach to them. An event happens, and in the split second that follows, our mind assigns it a meaning. It is good, it is bad, it is a catastrophe, it is an insult. That assigned meaning, that chosen judgment, is what sparks the emotional fire. His journal was the training ground where he practiced choosing better judgments deliberately and in advance. He would take a raw event, hold it in the light of his principles, and write a new story about it. The formula was simple: event plus chosen judgment equals emotional outcome. He was using his pen to rewrite the second part of that equation. You can see this in his entries. When facing the inevitable frustrations of leadership, he did not write, "This senator is trying to ruin my day." He wrote, "An obstacle to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. He was reframing the obstacle itself as the necessary material for his progress, transforming an external annoyance into an internal opportunity. When considering the sting of an insult, he would journal, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The insult is just sound and fury. It only harms you if you concede that it does." He was practicing detachment, draining the perceived slight of all its poisonous power by choosing to see it as irrelevant noise. Even physical pain, a constant companion during his military campaigns, was subjected to this perceptual shift. He reminded himself, pain is neither unbearable nor unending, as long as you remember its limits and do not add to it in your imagination. The sensation was a natural signal from the body, but the suffering was an optional layer of mental commentary he could choose to minimize. Writing these reframes was the critical step. Thinking a wiser thought is fleeting, but writing it down engraves it into your neural pathways. The act of forming the words on the page forces clarity, makes the abstract principle concrete, and creates a reference point you can return to when the world feels chaotic. It cemented the chosen judgment, so when a real crisis struck, he was not starting from scratch, desperately searching for composure. He was simply recalling and embodying the judgments he had already rehearsed and written in moments of calm. His journal was a library of prepared perceptions, a catalogue of wiser ways to see the world, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. This mental discipline did not make him indifferent, it made him resilient. He could feel the full weight of his duties without being crushed by them, because he had already decided on paper what that weight meant. These reframed perceptions were not gentle suggestions, but sharp commands etched into the parchment. His journal is filled with terse, urgent sentences that read like orders shouted across a battlefield of the mind. Stop drifting. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This is not the voice of a distant philosopher. It is the voice of a commander snapping his own attention back to the present moment. The psychological power of these short, brutally honest phrases is immense. In a state of anxiety or distraction, our thoughts become a tangled, looping narrative, a story we are telling ourselves about what might happen or what has already gone wrong. A long, reasoned argument often cannot penetrate that fog, but a direct command can. It acts like a mental anchor, a sudden point of stability in the swirling current. When he wrote "Stop Drifting," he was not offering a meditation on focus. He was issuing an immediate correction to a mind lost in worry about the future or regret about the past. The phrase cuts the engine of rumination with a single, clean stroke. It creates immediacy, forcing the awareness back to the only thing that is real, the present moment and the next right action. The command, "You could leave life right now," might sound startling at first, but its function is not morbid, it is liberating. He is not contemplating an end, he is defining a beginning. The reminder of life's fragility is used to instantly clarify its purpose. If this could be your final hour, what trivial complaint would you discard? What important kindness would you finally express? What project would you stop postponing? The command shocks the system out of petty concerns and into meaningful action. This is the journal as a drill sergeant's manual, a collection of pre-loaded cues for moments when his higher reasoning might be compromised by fatigue, fear, or anger. He wrote these anchors during times of clarity so he could grab onto them during times of storm. Think of it like programming a shortcut key for your best self. In a moment of rising irritation, instead of following the well-worn path of an angry reaction, his own written command would echo, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react." That short phrase, already believed and internalized, becomes the lever that pries him away from a destructive impulse. He was not just thinking about Stoicism, he was creating executable code for it, brief lines of instruction his mind could run under any conditions. This practice of writing direct commands transforms philosophy from a theory you admire into a tool you use, a wrench you keep in your pocket for when the machinery of your mind starts to come loose. And to make these tools even more powerful, he did not just write about abstract virtues. He populated his journal with a cast of mentors, real and imagined, who could show him the way. His private council of advisors was never more than a page away. Within the worn covers of his journal, Marcus Aurelius assembled a timeless assembly of mentors, a personal board of directors he could consult in an instant. He did this by carefully transcribing quotes from philosophers who came before him, especially Epictetus, the former slave-turned-teacher whose words formed the backbone of practical Stoicism. But he went further, writing detailed reflections on the character of his own ancestors, his adoptive father, and even respected contemporaries. This was not an academic exercise in history, it was a deliberate act of psychological scaffolding. On days when his own resolve felt thin, when the weight of the crown made his principles seem like distant theory, he could open his notebook and hear the clear, steady voice of Epictetus asking, "Is this within my control?" He could recall the dignified patience of his predecessor, Antoninus Pius, and ask himself, how would he have handled this petty dispute? He populated the blank parchment with a chorus of wiser voices, so he would never have to face a difficult decision alone. He was building a reservoir of borrowed strength, a library of character he could draw from when his own felt depleted. Think of it as curating your own personal hall of fame, not for their accomplishments but for their specific virtues. You might include a grandparent known for their unwavering kindness, a historical figure renowned for their courage in adversity, or a teacher who exemplified patience. The goal is to identify the exact quality you need to cultivate, and then keep a tangible reminder of someone who embodied it. For Marcus, writing, Antoninus Pius never dismissed a matter without thorough examination, was a direct prompt for his own conduct in the next meeting. Noting Epictetus said you are not your body but your capacity for choice was a ready-made tool to detach from physical discomfort or fear. These quotes and character studies became cognitive shortcuts, instantly activating a wiser mindset. He was wiring his brain to default to their example, using the power of social learning even in solitude. Your environment shapes your behavior, and by filling his most private environment, the pages of his journal, with the best influences he could find, he engineered a setting for his own moral growth. The journal became a room where only the wisest were allowed to speak, and their continuous, silent counsel slowly shaped the emperor's every reaction. This practice ensured he was always in training, always being gently pulled toward his best self by the examples he had chosen to honor. And this forward-looking guidance was perfectly balanced by a technique that grounded him firmly and humbly in the present moment. He anchored his perspective with a contemplation of endings. Among the most striking and often misunderstood elements of Marcus Aurelius's journal is his constant, quiet conversation with impermanence. He returns to the theme of mortality not with dread but with a startling practicality. You will find it on page after page, a steady refrain. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This was his application of the ancient practice known as Memento Mori, a reminder of mortality. For him, it was never a morbid fixation. It was the ultimate tool for mental clarity and urgent living. He used the thought of life's finitude as a lens to bring everything into sharp, immediate focus. When paralyzed by indecision or mired in petty social anxieties, he would write a simple prompt to himself. Think of the vast expanse of time behind you and the time that lies ahead. In the face of that infinity, how can you say this little moment, this slight, this inconvenience is of any great importance? He was performing a mental scale shift, deliberately zooming out from the close-up drama of a frustrating meeting or a personal insult to view it against the backdrop of cosmic time. That annoying person, he would note, will soon be gone, and you will be gone, and all who remember this incident will be gone. The intended effect was not nihilism, but liberation. By reminding himself that even the grandest empires turn to dust and the loudest voices fall silent, he drained the present moment's minor troubles of their imagined weight. They became what they truly were, passing clouds in a vast sky, not permanent stains on his soul. This practice served three precise psychological functions. First, it created a gentle but unignorable urgency. If time is limited, then procrastination on what matters, whether it is an act of kindness, a difficult conversation, or a creative project, becomes a form of self-betrayal. The journal entry was a nudge: stop postponing, the hour is late. Second, it systematically diminished fear, particularly the fear of other people's opinions. He wrote, "In a little while you will be nobody and nowhere, and neither will this person you fear, nor this thing you dread." The insult or the criticism loses its terrifying permanence when viewed from this distant vantage point. Finally, and most powerfully, it acted as a universal solvent for trivial worries. Is this problem worth the anxiety I am pouring into it? He would measure it against the ultimate metric. Does this concern touch upon my character, my virtue, my duty to others? If not, it was mere noise to be acknowledged and let go. This was not about denying the reality of hardship, but about correctly sizing it. A genuine loss or a true crisis demanded his full presence and compassion, but a bureaucratic delay or a rude comment did not deserve to hijack his inner peace. By writing these reminders, he was calibrating his emotional responses, training himself to reserve his deepest energy for what truly lasted, which for him was the quality of his own actions and the integrity of his soul. The thought of the end became paradoxically a guide for how to live fully in the middle of everything. He would often close his eyes and begin a deliberate journey upward. This was his most profound journaling exercise, a mental flight he meticulously recorded, known as the view from above. He would start with the immediate source of his distress, perhaps a sharp pain in his body or a simmering anger from a political slight. He would describe it on the page, not to dwell but to launch from it. Then, with his words, he would lift his own perspective. He wrote of rising mentally from his own aching limbs, looking down at his solitary form in the tent or the palace room. Then higher, seeing the building as a tiny structure among thousands in the great hive of the city. Higher still, until the city itself became a mere smudge on the coast of Italy, and the whole peninsula a curl of land jutting into the Mediterranean Sea. He would not stop there. His written gaze would pull back further, until the earth itself was a glowing blue and green marble hanging in the black void, and the sun was just one star among countless others in the sweeping arm of the galaxy. He was scripting a cosmic zoom out. The act of writing this sequence was crucial. It forced the mind to follow the words on a specific, transformative path. It was not a vague daydream, it was a disciplined meditation made concrete through language. By physically forming the sentences, he anchored the practice, making it a repeatable tool rather than a fleeting thought. What was the effect of this literary ascent? The problem that felt all-consuming, the insult that burned, the fear that gripped his chest did not disappear. But it was recontextualized, seen from that impossible height. His personal struggle was neither dismissed nor diminished in its reality, but it was framed within an almost unimaginable vastness. His journal entry becomes a record of this shift. That senator's harsh words, which felt like a dagger at ground level, now appeared as what they were, a brief, faint sound wave lost in the eternal silence of space. His own life, with all its duties and pains, was a single, flickering point of light in a tapestry of billions. This was not meant to make his life seem meaningless, but to make his anxieties about control and permanence seem precisely what they were: illusions. He was reminding himself, through written narrative, that he was a part of nature, subject to the same laws of growth and decay as a leaf on an oak tree. His troubles were not unique violations of a cosmic order. They were the natural friction of being alive in a flowing, changing universe. Writing this perspective trained his mind in equanimity, the steady calm that comes from seeing things as they are, not as our frightened, egocentric minds proclaim them to be. When he returned from that mental journey and looked again at the scroll on his desk or the map of the frontier, his emotional charge was often gone. The task remained, but the panic had dissipated. he could now address it not as a personal catastrophe, but simply as the next piece of the world's work to be done with clarity and without the crushing weight of self-importance. This view from above was the ultimate antidote to the pettiness and pressure of power, a way to touch the infinite and return to the finite task with clean hands and a quiet mind. He would take a deep breath and begin a ruthless act of deconstruction on the page. This was his technique of reduction to essence, a mental scalpel he used to dissect the illusions that caused him anxiety or misplaced desire. When a powerful emotion threatened to cloud his judgment, Marcus Aurelius did not argue with the feeling directly. Instead, he would pick up his stylus and systematically break the object of his fear or longing down to its most basic physical reality. He wrote to strip away the layers of cultural story and personal value judgment, reducing things to their raw, unadorned components. The goal was to see the thing as it truly was, not as his mind had dressed it up to be. Take a fine Roman banquet, for instance, an experience laden with social status and sensory pleasure. In a moment of temptation or distraction, he would not simply write, "Do not desire rich food." That would be a weak command against a powerful urge. Instead, he would perform the dissection. He would describe the meal in stark, elemental terms. "This is dead fish," he might write. "This is a dead bird. This wine is merely fermented grape juice. The fine olive oil is simply pressed fruit. The exquisite presentation is a temporary arrangement of decaying matter." By writing this out, he was not denying the pleasure of taste. He was denying the story his mind had attached to it, the story that this meal represented success, comfort, or a reward he desperately needed. He was peeling off the misleading label to see the plain contents underneath. The same ruthless reduction applied to his fears, particularly the fear of loss or disgrace. "What is fame, really?" he would write. "It is the chattering of tongues. It is the opinion of others, a fleeting sound in the air, as changeable as the wind." To dread losing reputation was to dread the loss of something that had no solid core, no independent existence outside of other people's momentary thoughts. By reducing it to its essence, chatter, he drained the concept of its terrifying power. This practice worked because our suffering is almost always a product of the secondary narratives we build around primary facts. Primary fact is a sensation on the tongue or a set of sound waves forming words. The secondary narrative is "this meal will make me happy," or that criticism means I am a failure. His journal was the workshop where he dismantled those secondary narratives, brick by linguistic brick. Writing was essential to the process, thinking it was too vague, but forcing himself to find the plain, even crude, words to describe the object made the illusion undeniable. It became an exercise in radical honesty. What are you actually afraid of? Not a grand concept like failure, but the specific physical reality of a quiet room, an empty ledger, or a certain look on someone's face. By naming those base components, he could then address them with reason, rather than being overwhelmed by the monolithic, scary idea they had formed in his mind. This reduction to essence was a grounding wire, a way to discharge the static electricity of emotion and see the world with clear, calm eyes. It was the final, decisive move in a system designed for one purpose: to return the emperor's mind again and again to a state of unshakable sanity. The journal's pages became a map for navigating an uncontrollable world, and at its center was a single, dividing line. This was the dichotomy of control, the fundamental Stoic principle that Marcus Aurelius used his writing to engrave into his own thinking. It is the practice of relentlessly sorting every single thing in your life into one of two categories: what is up to you and what is not. For Marcus, this was not a philosophical theory to be debated. It was a daily survival skill to be applied, and his journal was the workspace where that sorting happened. You can see it in the repetitive, almost weary way he returns to the theme. He is not just thinking about control, he is writing lists, forcing himself to articulate the boundary again and again. On one side of the line, under his power, he would write his own judgments, his values, his intentions, and his voluntary actions. On the other side, firmly outside his power, went everything else: the weather, the health of his body, the opinions of senators, the loyalty of distant generals, the outcome of a battle once the order was given. The act of writing this list was the crucial step. In the privacy of his tent, he could admit what he so desperately wanted to control but simply could not. He could write, "I cannot control whether the plague spreads, but I can control how I organize aid for the sick. I cannot control if a trusted advisor betrays me, but I can control whether I act with integrity myself." This written categorization was a profound act of emotional triage. It allowed him to stop wasting his finite mental energy, his peace of mind, on the endless category of things outside his command. Think of your own mind as a command center with limited bandwidth. If you are constantly monitoring screens showing data you cannot change, the weather in another country, the stock market ticker, other people's private thoughts, you have no resources left to operate the controls you actually possess: your own decisions, your focus, your next move. Marcus used his journal to shut off those irrelevant feeds. By physically writing, "This is not mine to govern," he was giving himself permission to let it go, to stop emotionally investing in an outcome he could never guarantee. This is why the journal was essential. Our minds are slippery and prefer to worry about what is dramatic rather than what is manageable. Writing forces clarity. You cannot vaguely fret about reputation on paper. You have to spell out, "Reputation is the opinion of others, and that opinion is outside my control." Once it is written, the truth is undeniable. You have drawn the line yourself. Then, and only then, could he pivot his writing to the smaller but infinitely more powerful category. Having released his grip on the uncontrollable, he would then fill the page with the things that were firmly within his domain. "I can control my effort today. I can control my fairness in this meeting. I can control my patience with that difficult person." This shift is everything. It moves you from a state of helpless anxiety about vast, external events to a state of purposeful agency over your very next action. The journal transformed him from an emperor trying to command the tides, a futile and exhausting endeavor, into an emperor focused solely on steering his own ship with skill and courage, regardless of the sea's condition. His sanity depended on this daily, written reminder that while he ruled an empire, his true sovereignty was only ever over the space between his own ears. His journal was a training ground for catastrophes that had not yet happened. Marcus Aurelius understood a profound truth about the human mind. We rise to the level of our training, not to the level of our hopes. So he did not merely reflect on the day's events. He used his writing to conduct meticulous mental fire drills. He would envision the worst possible scenarios, not to dwell in fear, but to rehearse his ideal response on the page. This practice transformed his notebook into a simulator for serenity. He would write out detailed scripts for facing profound loss, the betrayal of a close ally, a sudden and severe illness, or a devastating military defeat. In one entry, he instructs himself, "When you are distressed by an external thing, it is not the thing itself that troubles you, but your judgment about it. And this judgment you have the power to erase now." He was not waiting for the distress to arrive. He was writing the antidote in advance, programming his mind with a clear command he could recall in the moment of crisis. The act of writing these scripts was the critical component because thinking is fleeting, but writing is a physical commitment. It forges stronger neural connections, laying down tracks in the brain for calm and reason to travel when the emotional storm hits. Think of it like a pilot practicing emergency procedures in a flight simulator. The pilot does not hope they will remember what to do if an engine fails. They have practiced the exact sequence of actions so many times that their response becomes automatic, bypassing panic. Marcus was doing the same for his psyche. By writing, "If my child falls ill, I will focus on securing the best care and providing comfort, not on railing against fate," he was installing a cognitive protocol. When the real hardship came, the initial shock and grief were still present. That is human, but his mind did not spiral into chaos. It had a pre-written path to follow, a path of purposeful action rooted in his values, not in blind reaction. This rehearsal made his philosophy shockproof. It ensured that Stoicism was not just a fair-weather friend, a set of ideas he believed when life was easy, but a resilient operating system that would boot up under the heaviest load. His journal entries were the code for that system, written in moments of peace to ensure it would run in times of war. The ink was often mixed by lamplight in a military tent. To understand the full power of his system, you must see the man in the setting where most of his journal was likely written, not in a palace library, but on the cold, distant frontiers of the empire. Marcus Aurelius spent over a decade of his reign leading campaigns along the Danube, living in temporary camps surrounded by the sounds of soldiers and the tension of impending conflict. His writing tools were simple and portable, a wax tablet he could carry with him or scraps of papyrus. This was not a leisurely literary pursuit, it was a discipline carved out of chaos. He wrote in the early morning before the camp stirred, or late at night after the day's decisions were made. The ritual was as important as the words. The very act of taking out the tablet, smoothing the wax, and beginning to write was a signal to his mind, a transition from the external world of command to the internal world of order. It created a sacred space of solitude amid the crowd, a few moments where the emperor answered to no one but his own conscience. This consistency transformed journaling from a sporadic emotional outlet into a non-negotiable habit, as integral to his daily routine as eating or sleeping. He did not write only when he felt inspired or particularly distressed. He wrote because it was time to write. That regularity is what built the mental muscle. Just as a soldier drills with his weapons daily, so his movements become instinct in battle. Marcus drilled with his principles daily, so his responses became instinct under pressure. The physical ritual, the scratch of the stylus, the focus required to form the letters, all of it grounded his swirling thoughts into something tangible and manageable. It moved philosophy from the realm of airy ideas into the realm of bodily action, a practice as real and immediate as the ground beneath his boots. This marriage of physical ritual and mental exercise made his journal a true anchor, a fixed point he could return to no matter how turbulent the world around him became. You will search in vain for a story within those pages. Flip through the private writings of Marcus Aurelius and you will discover something startling in its omission. There is no narrative. He does not recount the dramatic events of his day, the heated debates in the Senate, or the grim details from the plague wards. He does not chronicle his feelings of grief or frustration, dwelling on them to explore their texture. This absence is not an accident, it is the design. His journaling system was prescriptive, not descriptive. Its purpose was correction, not recollection. Each entry was a targeted intervention, a written adjustment to his own thinking in that very moment. He used the page not to describe the storm, but to steady the helm. This is a profound departure from much of modern journaling, where we are often encouraged to vent, to spill our emotional state onto the page as a form of release. There is value in that, of course, giving voice to our inner world, but Marcus' method operated on a different principle. He believed that merely describing an emotion without a framework to move through it could sometimes reinforce its grip. It could leave you circling the same emotional drain, narrating your distress rather than dismantling it. So his entries are full of commands and questions, not stories. You see him intercept a rising feeling of anger and immediately write a command to dissolve it. you see him sense a wave of self-pity and immediately pose a question to expose its irrational core. The journal was a workshop for repairing his judgments, not a museum for displaying his wounds. This focus on correction is what made the system so efficacious for maintaining sanity under extreme pressure. It was relentlessly forward-looking and solution-focused, every word aimed at a single target. How do I return to a state of rational peace right now? He did not write, "I am so angry at that general for his incompetence," and then detail all the reasons why. He wrote that man acts from his own ignorance. My task is to meet his error with my own virtue. The emotion is acknowledged only as a signal, a flashing light indicating where a mistaken belief has taken root. The writing is then the tool to dig that belief out and replace it with a wiser one. This transforms the page from a passive mirror, reflecting your turmoil, into an active tool, reshaping your perception. It turns journaling from a record of who you were in a difficult moment into a blueprint for who you choose to become in the next one. The emperor's private practice has found a surprising echo in the modern laboratory. Centuries after his words were written, psychological research has begun to map the very mental pathways his journaling system was designed to walk. What Marcus Aurelius developed through intuition and necessity, science now validates through controlled study and brain imaging. This is not merely a historical curiosity, it is evidence that he stumbled upon a fundamental technology for human resilience. Consider the work on expressive writing, pioneered by psychologist James Pennebaker. His research demonstrated that individuals who wrote about deeply emotional experiences for just 15 minutes a day, over several days, showed measurable improvements in both physical and mental well-being. They visited doctors less often, reported better mood, and even showed strengthened immune function. But here is the crucial detail: the benefit did not come from simply venting or detailing the trauma. The most significant improvements occurred when people's writing began to make sense of the experience, when they started to find meaning, structure, and a narrative of understanding within the chaos. This is precisely what Marcus was doing. He was not just dumping his fears onto the page, he was actively restructuring them, searching for the lesson, imposing a framework of Stoic principle upon the raw material of his anxiety. His journal was an engine for making sense, and modern science confirms that sense-making is where healing begins. Then there is the concept of cognitive defusion, a core technique from acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. Cognitive defusion is the skill of learning to see your thoughts as just thoughts, not as literal truths or commands that must be obeyed. It is the practice of creating a small space between you and the swirling narrative in your mind, so you can observe it without being swept away. Listen to how a modern therapist might guide a client. Notice the thought, "I am a failure," and instead of fighting it, simply say to yourself, "I am having the thought that I am a failure." This slight linguistic shift creates detachment. Now read Marcus Aurelius in his tent, writing, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Or his command to ask, "What is this?" He was practicing defusion 2,000 years before it had a name. By writing his fears down, he was externalizing them, taking them out of the shadowy realm of pure feeling and putting them on a page where he could look at them objectively. A thought trapped in your head feels like the whole world. A thought written down is just a sentence, a string of words you can examine, question, and if necessary, revise. His journal was the diffusion tool, transforming overwhelming internal states into manageable external objects. Furthermore, studies on structured self-reflection reveal its power for emotional regulation. When individuals are guided to not just write about an event, but to analyze it through specific, constructive questions, they develop greater emotional agility. They become less reactive and more responsive. Marcus Aurelius' evening examination was a masterclass in this structured reflection. His questions, where did I go wrong? Where did I let an external event disturb my peace? Forced an analytical rather than an emotional review. He was not asking, how did I feel? He was asking, what did I learn? Modern research supports this approach, showing that focusing on the instructive aspect of a difficult experience, rather than ruminating on the feeling itself, leads to greater resilience and reduced anxiety over time. His system effectively built what psychologists call a growth mindset, where every challenge, even his own mistakes, became data for improvement, not evidence of inadequacy. The parallels are profound. The morning premeditation is a form of stress inoculation, mentally rehearsing challenges to reduce their shock value. The view from above is a deliberate perspective-shifting exercise, a way to counter the brain's natural negativity bias by zooming out to a bigger picture. The reduction to essence is a reality-testing technique, stripping away cognitive distortions to see things as they are. What we call these practices today does not matter. What matters is that they work, and we now have the science to show why. Marcus Aurelius' journal was not a relic of ancient thought. It was a precognitive behavioral therapy workbook. He built a system for mental hygiene using the tools he had, ink and parchment, to accomplish what we now seek through therapy apps and wellness journals, to quiet the noise, to manage the storm within, and to anchor the self in something steadier than passing circumstance. This validation from modern psychology does not diminish his achievement, it elevates it. It suggests he was not just wise, but empirically correct about the architecture of a sound mind. His methods were a personal lifeline, but they point toward a universal human need, the need to process the world through the clarifying filter of our own chosen words. There is a crucial distinction between his method and simply keeping a diary of distress. To mistake one for the other is to turn a tool for clarity into an engine for despair. The most common misapplication of this system is to use the journal not as a workshop for repair, but as a vault for rumination. Imagine someone, inspired by Marcus, who sits down each night and diligently records every slight, every worry, every ounce of frustration they felt that day. They describe the unfairness in detail, they catalog their resentments, they give a full voice to their anxieties without ever challenging them. This is not the Aurelian method, this is its inverse. Marcus did not document his troubled feelings to validate them, he documented them to dissect and correct them. His writing was a process of interrogation, not confession. The page was where he argued with his own weaker impulses, not where he gave them a permanent home. If your journal becomes only a log of complaints, you are not practicing cognitive therapy. You are rehearsing your grievances, strengthening the neural pathways of victimhood and anger with every sentence you write. The ink solidifies the storm instead of calming it. Another peril lies in twisting the evening examination into a session of harsh self-criticism. When Marcus asked, "Where did I go wrong?" he was not seeking a flaw to punish himself with, he was seeking an error in judgment to learn from. His tone is that of a coach reviewing game footage, not a judge delivering a sentence. The goal was improvement, not condemnation. If you use your reflections to berate yourself, to write "I failed again, I am so weak," you have missed the point entirely. That kind of writing reinforces a negative self-concept and feeds the very anxiety the practice is meant to alleviate. The journal then becomes a place of self-flagellation, not self-governance. The system also fails if it remains purely intellectual, a dry recitation of principles without any connection to your lived emotional reality. Quoting Epictetus is not the same as applying his question to your specific, boiling frustration in the moment. The power comes from the friction, from using the Stoic idea as a whetstone against the particular edge of your own anger or fear. Writing, "I should be calm," while seething inside is useless. You must write through the seething, you must describe the heat of it, and then apply the principle directly to that heat. Ask, what story am I telling myself about this event that is making me so angry? Is that story entirely true? What is within my control right now, in this fiery moment? That is where the transformation happens, in the marriage of raw feeling and deliberate reason on the page. Finally, the system becomes a pitfall if it is used as a tool for avoidance. Stoicism, and by extension this journaling method, is not about suppressing emotion or becoming indifferent. It is about processing emotion with wisdom so you can engage with the world more effectively, not withdraw from it. If you use your writing to philosophically rationalize away genuine grief or to build a mental fortress that keeps out all feeling, you are building a prison, not a sanctuary. Marcus's sadness at the loss of his children is palpable in his writings, but he channels it into a deeper commitment to duty and love, not into numbness. The journal should be a bridge back to engaged living, not a moat that separates you from it. The key is to remember the purpose. Every word should be in service of returning your mind to a state of clear, principled action. If a sentence does not serve that end, question why it is on the page. The system's true power lies in its adaptability, not its antiquity. You do not need a wax tablet or a military campaign to begin. The core of Marcus Aurelius's practice was a simple, two-part daily rhythm, a mental inhale and exhale that you can structure into your own life with nothing more than a notebook or a blank document. The goal is not to replicate his every word, but to adopt the functional architecture of his mind. Let us build a modern version, focusing on 2 brief sessions, one in the morning and one at night, each taking only a few focused minutes. The only non-negotiable rule is honesty with yourself and consistency over literary flair. Your entries are for your eyes only, so write with brutal clarity, not for an audience. Begin your day with the morning premeditation. This is your psychological inoculation. Before checking your phone, before the rush of the day begins, find a quiet moment. Open your journal and write just a few lines in response to these prompts. First, what potential irritations or challenges am I likely to face today? Be specific. You might write, my project meeting at 10 could be contentious, or I will likely feel overwhelmed by my inbox by midday, or I may encounter someone who is dismissive of my ideas. Simply naming these possibilities robs them of their power to surprise and trigger you. Second, and this is the crucial step, how will I choose to meet these challenges? This is where you script your virtue, write your intention. For the contentious meeting you might write, I will listen first, speak with clarity, and stay focused on solutions, not personalities. For the overwhelming inbox, I will prioritize 3 key messages and accept that I cannot answer everything today. For the dismissive person, I will remember their behavior reflects their own perspective, and I will respond with calm facts. This is not positive thinking, it is prepared thinking. You are deciding in the calm of the morning who you want to be in the heat of the afternoon, installing a mental program for composure before the code of the day starts running. Then, as your day closes, turn to the evening review. This is not a diary of events, but an audit of your mind using the ultimate filter, the dichotomy of control. Reflect on the day and ask yourself 2 structured questions. First, what happened today that was outside my control? Write it down plainly. The traffic jam was outside my control. My colleague's negative mood was outside my control. The unexpected request from a client was outside my control. The act of writing it and categorizing it here is a release, a way to consciously place those burdens down. You are telling your mind, I am no longer carrying this. The second question is where your power resides and where your focus must go. What was within my control and how did I use that power? This is your field of agency. Your reaction to the traffic was within your control. Did you choose to listen to a podcast or stew in frustration? Your response to your colleague was within your control. Did you offer patience or add to the tension? Your handling of the client request was within your control. Did you prioritize it calmly or let it spark anxiety? Be ruthlessly honest. If you used your power well, acknowledge it briefly. I remained patient. If you ceded your power, note it without self-judgment. I reacted with irritation instead of calm. The purpose is not to berate yourself, but to see the pattern, to learn where your internal triggers lie, so you can prepare for them better tomorrow. This two-question review accomplishes the core Stoic move. It systematically separates what is yours from what is not, freeing you from the weight of the world and focusing your energy on the only thing you can truly improve, your own choices. Keep it short, keep it real, and do it consistently. The magic is not in a single profound entry, but in the cumulative effect of daily, gentle course corrections, writing your way, line by line, toward a quieter and more resilient mind. The blank page waits not for a story, but for a strategy. To see this system breathe, let's follow a modern journal entry, not from an emperor, but from someone you might know. Meet Alex, a project manager whose day has unraveled. A key client rejected a proposal Alex spent weeks on. A team member missed a critical deadline, and the resulting stress spilled over into a sharp exchange with a colleague. The old instinct might be to vent, to write a furious paragraph detailing every injustice. But tonight, Alex opens a notebook to practice the Aurelian method. The first move is not description but dissection, applying the discipline of perception. Alex writes, the client said no, my teammate was late, my colleague and I argued. These are the raw facts. Then comes the reframe, the written intervention. Beneath those lines, Alex continues, the client's decision is outside my control. My judgment that this is a personal failure is within my control. I choose to see this as feedback, not as a verdict on my worth. The teammate's delay is outside my control. My reaction and my plan to prevent it next time are within my control. The argument was a clash of stressed perspectives, not a permanent rift. With each sentence, Alex is not denying the frustration, but deliberately choosing its meaning, draining the event of its catastrophic narrative and reclaiming agency over the interpretation. Next comes the structured audit, the evening examination filtered through the dichotomy of control. Alex draws a simple mental line down the page. On one side, outside my control, Alex writes, the client's ultimate choice, the teammate's personal emergency that caused the delay, the colleague's initial tone. Writing these down is an act of release, a conscious unclenching of the mind's grip on the uncontrollable. On the other side, inside my control, the list shifts to power. I controlled the quality of the proposal I submitted. I can control how I request updates from the team moving forward. I controlled my apology to my colleague for my sharp tone. I control my next steps, which are to schedule a call to understand the client's concerns and to revise the project timeline calmly tomorrow. This categorization is transformative. It moves Alex from a state of helpless frustration about external events to a state of clear, actionable ownership over a response. The emotional charge dissipates not because the problems vanished, but because they have been sorted, with the heavy, immovable boulders of other people's choices placed to the side, leaving a clear path of personal responsibility to walk. Finally, Alex ends not in the past, but by programming the future with a morning premeditation for tomorrow. Knowing the next day will involve difficult conversations and a heavy workload, Alex writes a short, direct command at the bottom of the entry, just as Marcus would have. It reads, tomorrow, I will lead with curiosity, not defense. I will focus on the next right action, not the mountain of tasks. This is not a hopeful wish, it is a pre-loaded instruction. When Alex wakes up and glances at this note, the mind is already primed. The challenging client call is no longer an ambush. It is an expected scenario for which the response curiosity, not defense, has already been chosen. The overwhelming workload is met with the filter, the next right action. This tiny script, written in a moment of calm, becomes a cognitive anchor in the coming storm. The entire entry, from reframe to audit to command, took perhaps 10 minutes, but in that time, Alex performed the same psychological operation Marcus did on the Danube frontier, turning a chaotic day from a source of distress into raw material for resilience, using nothing but honest words on a page to rebuild a sense of sovereignty from the inside out. The final aim of all those late-night writings was not to become stone, but to find a deep and unshakable calm. Marcus Aurelius was not chasing a life without feeling. He was pursuing a state the Greeks called ataraxia, a tranquility of mind that remains undisturbed by the passions and chaos of the external world. This is the quiet center of the storm, the inner sovereignty he wrote himself toward, line by line. Every technique in his journal served this single, ultimate purpose. The Morning Premeditation was not pessimism. It was a shield for his tranquility, deflecting the day's irritations before they could pierce his peace. The Evening Examination was a polishing cloth, wiping away the mental dust of mistaken judgments that had clouded his calm. The view from above was the ultimate perspective shift, lifting his gaze from the frantic waves to the steady horizon, restoring a profound sense of equanimity. Even the reduction to essence served this end, stripping frightening or alluring illusions down to their harmless, simple components, so they could no longer trigger a turbulent reaction. His direct commands were the reins he used to steer his mind back to this still point whenever it began to stray. This is the crucial distinction. His system was not about suppression, but about liberation. He did not want to stop feeling grief at a loss or frustration at an obstacle. He wanted to feel those things without being enslaved by them, without letting them hijack his reason and his capacity to act with virtue. The journal was the training ground where he practiced that liberation. By writing out his reframes, he was rehearsing emotional freedom. By sorting the controllable from the uncontrollable, he was drawing a boundary around his peace, declaring that his inner state was a sovereign territory no external event could invade without his consent. This is the profound promise of the practice, that you can care deeply about the world, engage fully with its challenges, and yet maintain a quiet citadel within yourself that remains untouched by its storms. Your feelings are acknowledged, but they are not the king. Reason and principle hold the throne. This is what true resilience looks like, not a brittle hardness, but a flexible, unbreakable calm that can absorb the blows of fortune without losing its essential shape. His ink was the mortar for that inner citadel. His sanity was a daily construction project, not a gift he was born with. The profound composure we associate with Marcus Aurelius was not a serene inheritance. It was a hard-won achievement, built sentence by sentence in the quiet hours of the night. It was the direct product of a deliberate, written practice, a system where philosophical principles were not just admired from a distance, but actively used as tools to repair his mind under relentless pressure. This is the ultimate takeaway from his private journal. He did not merely think about Stoicism, he wrote himself into it, using the physical act of putting words on a page to forge a new and more resilient way of seeing the world. His clarity was not a default setting, it was a chosen destination, and his notebook was the map he drew to get there, over and over again. This transforms his legacy from that of a wise ruler into something far more accessible and powerful, the legacy of a practitioner who discovered a fundamental technology for human equilibrium. He proved that the most important empire we will ever govern is the one inside our own skull, and that the pen can be mightier than the scepter when it comes to ruling it. He turned a simple, private notebook into the command center for his own self-governance. Within those pages, he conducted the daily business of his inner kingdom, passing judgments on his own thoughts, negotiating treaties with his fears, and drafting laws for his own conduct. The journal was his constitution, his court, and his council, all bound in a single, portable volume. This is the profound power available to anyone, the power to externalize the chaos, to hold a conversation with your better self, and to write the script for the person you wish to become. You do not need a crown to start this practice. You only need a blank page and the willingness to be honest. Your own notebook can become that same command center. It can be the place where you sort the controllable from the uncontrollable, where you rehearse your virtues before the day demands them, and where you audit your choices with the gentle curiosity of a lifelong student. This is not about writing a masterpiece. It is about building a personal operating system for resilience. Start small with the two-part rhythm, the morning intention and the evening review. Use the page to ask yourself, what is this feeling really? What is within my power right now? Let your pen perform the cognitive surgery that clears away the mental clutter. The goal is not to achieve perfect Stoic calm overnight, but to begin the daily practice of returning your mind, again and again, to a place of clear, principled choice. Your first entry does not need to be profound, it just needs to be true. Pick up your own stylus in whatever form it takes and start the conversation. Your inner sovereignty awaits its first written decree.